Ah, so you've chosen to serve Rosaria after all. She will be pleased with me for finding her another finger. But be warned, my friend. Rosaria's fingers need only fetch tongues for their mistress. Otherwise, we are free, unchained.
Rosaria, mother of Rebirth, matron of the man-grubs, the hand whose outstretched fingers seek to rip pale tongues and fire itself from the embers for their goddess. Dark Souls 3 has been out for about 5 years now as of the making of this video, and the community has made so many discoveries during this time, and it's nothing short of amazing how well certain parts of the story have been pieced together just by viewing item descriptions, finding every scrap of dialogue, and also by digging into the game's files themselves to give us some context that we were never really meant to see. And as much as we've learned, there are still so many gaps in the story that we will never be able to fill. Today, I would like to focus on one of those gaps in particular. As you may have guessed, it's the identity of Rosaria, mother of Rebirth. There are a few theories on her identity already, but they all center around one indisputable fact, and that is Rosaria has a direct connection to Gwenevere and the royal bloodline. Some people also speculate that Rosaria is the Queen of Lothric, but I think the Queen is most likely Gwenevere herself, so I'm going to lump those two theories together. So first, let's establish that Gwenevere is most likely the Queen of Lothric herself. In Dark Souls 1, the description for the Divine Blessing reads, "Holy water from Goddess Gwenevere. Fully restore HP and undo irregularities. The Goddess of Sunlight, Gwenevere, daughter of the great Lord of Sunlight, Gwen, is cherished by all as a symbol of bounty and fertility." In Dark Souls 3, similarly, it reads, "Holy water blessed by the Queen of Lothric. Fully restores HP and cures ailments. The Queen of Lothric, married to the former King Osiris, was initially revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. After giving birth to Ocelot, her youngest, she quietly disappeared." Just from those two correlating descriptions, we learn of 3 similarities between the Queen and Gwenevere, which by Dark Souls standards is like a ton. The first is that both are able to bestow the exact same blessing on this holy water. It's unlikely that anyone would be able to replicate such a miracle of Gwenevere without some direct tie to the goddess herself. The second is that both Gwenevere and the Queen are revered as, quote, a goddess of fertility and bounty. And third, we learn that after giving birth to Ocelot, the Queen disappeared quietly, much like Gwenevere did whenever she fled from Anor Londo with the flame god Flann. Much like she probably did when Flann's kingdom started to weaken as well. And we know the Lothric bloodline is obsessed with creating a worthy heir to link the fire, just like Gwenevere, who had been commanded by her father to shepherd humans toward the linking of the first flame. So Gwenevere has this pattern. When a kingdom is weakened, failing, and it no longer shows the promise regarding creation of a new Lord of Cinder, Gwenevere slips away quietly in search of a new monarch and a new kingdom in which to spread her influence and bloodline. And make no mistake, the kingdom of Lothric is indeed failing. Lorien and Lothric refused to link the fire, and the next child, Ocelot, was born weak and invisible, a crossbreed that should never have been. So the Queen, a goddess of fertility and bounty, slipped away, as she always did. Hopefully that's enough to convince you that Gwenevere is the Queen herself, because that means we can really get into the nitty-gritty of the identity of Rosaria. Is she Gwenevere herself, or perhaps one of her children? Well, first let's look at the evidence supporting the theory that she is indeed Gwenevere. The biggest piece of evidence is undoubtedly the fact that whenever you transpose Rosaria's soul, you gain access to the Bountiful Sunlight miracle, which reads, "Special miracle granted by the Princess of Sunlight. Gradually restores a large amount of HP for self and those in the vicinity. The miracles of Gwenevere, loved as both a mother and a wife, bestow their blessing on a great many warriors." This definitely gives us an irrefutable link to Gwenevere, but this can't alone be considered enough to say that she is Gwenevere. After all, we gain the other miracle of Gwenevere, Soothing Sunlight, by transposing the soul of the dancer. It also says the miracle is granted by Gwenevere, and that could simply mean that this miracle was granted to Rosaria in some way, shape, or form. So the description really does as much to support the idea that Rosaria is a daughter of Gwenevere, as it does to support the idea that she's Gwenevere herself. The next major piece of evidence is that when Leonard kills Rosaria, spoilers, and takes her soul, he takes it back to Guinevere's bedchamber to keep it away from you in some misguided attempt to protect her from you. What exactly he fears you'll do is unclear, but it seems like he's afraid that you're nothing more than a hungry beast who will devour her soul to gain something for yourself.
To spoil her soul. Certainly no beast wrapped in human skin.
Which probably isn't too far from the truth. Both goddesses are also worshipped at bedside, and both wear the title of mother, suggesting further connection, but let's go back to the matter of Leonard for a minute. Leonard's questline is directly tied to Rosaria, so it stands to reason that there should be some significant information that we can glean from interactions with him. We first meet Ringfinger Leonard in Firelink Shrine leaning against the throne of the Twin Princes. When spoken to, he gives us cracked red eye orbs, a single-use item that initiates an invasion. What's interesting, though, is the reason he tells us to use them.
Unkindled, are we? And fast on the trail of the Lords absconded? Then these red eyes are for you. Use them to pillage embers and briefly heighten your strength for your duty. What else are unkindled ashes good for?
Leonard encourages us to continue our duty, to seek the fire, and it's hard to tell if that's actually what he wants, or if it's just to make us comfortable with the idea of invading and pillaging fire from other unkindled attempting to link their own first flame. After all, after successfully invading and acquiring a pale tongue, he will tell you where to find a proper red eye orb, one that can be used repeatedly. And once you do acquire it, he says this.
Aha, you found a proper red eye. Brilliant. I knew you were a dangerous woman. Now invade and pillage all you like. And if you grow weary of your duty, you too may become a finger. Come on, give yourself to Rosaria of the Cathedral of the Deep.
Each time Leonard speaks with us, he's probing further into our interest in invading and pillaging fire. And once he sees our propensity for it, he can assume it's a safe bet we'd be interested in meeting Rosaria, and that we might make a useful finger for her. He basically even tells us, hey, it's okay if you don't want to link the first flame anymore, just kill and pillage, that's the fun part. Should you follow his advice and join the Fingers of Rosaria, he'll have this to say.
So, you've chosen to serve Rosaria after all. She will be pleased with me for finding her another finger. But be warned, my friend. Rosaria's fingers need only fetch tongues for their mistress. Otherwise, we are free, unchained. Like Yellowfinger, you can choose to believe that all fingers share camaraderie. But do not force your romance upon the rest of us.
This is where we can learn the goal of the covenant we have just joined, to find pale tongues for Rosaria. Multiple item descriptions tell you that fingers collect tongues to comfort their voiceless goddess, but is that actually by any command or desire of her own? Perhaps she simply rewards it because she is touched by their effort. I think it's more than that, though. She doesn't need the pale tongues, but to her, maybe it's seen as evidence that they have successfully invaded, killed, and pillaged Flame. This is one of the main reasons that I personally don't believe Rosaria is Gwenevere, because the motivations just don't add up. Gwenevere would want her followers to link the fire, not invade and kill others attempting to link it. Plus, I just don't see a reason for Gwenevere to end up here. If she fled Lothric, she would have fled in search of another kingdom to manipulate. Is it possible she stopped by the Cathedral of the Deep, a former Way of White sanctuary, and became trapped in her chambers with Aldrich beating down the door? Maybe, but again, it just doesn't feel right that Gwenevere would sit there trapped, especially when Aldrich is long gone by the time we arrive. But Dawn, you say, isn't that precisely where we find her in Dark Souls 1? Well, let's not forget that the Gwenevere we meet in Dark Souls 1 is nothing more than an illusion being held in place by Gwendolyn, and not the goddess herself. She was long gone by the time the moon set on Anor Londo. If you were to ask me, I'd lean much more towards Rosaria being a daughter of Gwenevere, particularly Gertrude, the heavenly daughter, or in Japanese text, the angel's daughter. The item description for divine pillars of light reads, Miracle of Gertrude, the heavenly daughter, brings down multiple pillars of light in vicinity. The queen's holy maiden, Gertrude, was visited by an angel who revealed this tale to her. Despite losing both her sight and voice, she was determined to record the tale. Ordinary men cannot decipher her fragmentary scrawl, nor comprehend how it became the foundation of the angelic faith of Lothric. When the Ring City DLC came out, we learned a lot of things about the angels that completely flipped our understanding of them upside down. The angels are actually highly regarded and seen as holy symbols by those of Londor, a land whose desire is to pillage the first flame for humanity, as Yuria encourages us to do.
O lord and liege, I prithee, play the usurper. When the moment cometh to link the fire, wrest it from its mantle. The age of fire was founded by the old gods, sustained by the linking of the fire. But the gods are no more, and the all-powerful fire deserveth a new heir. Our Lord of Hollows, it shall be, who weareth the true face of mankind.
It is likely, then, that the angels appeared to Gertrude and spoke to her a prophecy of usurping the fire as opposed to linking it. It explains why the angelic faith is considered heresy in Lothric, and why she would potentially be imprisoned at the top of the Grand Archives, at least until she was freed by her Ascended Wing Knights, and one of the only cleric man-grubs that we encounter outside the Cathedral of the Deep. Being blind and mute, it's safe to say she would likely have had trouble getting anywhere on her own. And where else would this grub have escorted her besides the Cathedral of the Deep? A place no longer interested in linking the fire. A place much more in line with deposing the old gods and usurping them. Whether Aldrich was still here at the time is hard to say for certain, but it does certainly seem that the bars outside of her bedchambers are broken and bent inwards as if someone had tried to get through. Notice also how many grubs ambush you here to prevent your entry. It's likely no coincidence that they were prepared to defend her. So now, here sits the voiceless goddess. The goddess who rewards those who bring her evidence that they have pillaged the fire for themselves, perhaps in some misunderstanding of the prophecy that she was given. After all, the idea of humanity wresting fire from its mantle is a fairly novel idea for most beings of the Dark Souls universe, as are the Unkindled. Ash, born of Ash. Gertrude could be forgiven if she thought it was more a tale of an Ashen One stealing the fire from his or her counterparts, as opposed to taking the first flame itself. Now, one piece of evidence that runs counter to this theory would be the description of the Obscuring Ring. Ring bestowed upon the fingers of Rosaria, invaders who seek tongues for their goddess. Hides the presence of the wearer when far away. It was said that Rosaria, mother of Rebirth, was robbed of her tongue by her firstborn and has been waiting for their return ever since. As you recall, the description for Divine Pillars of Light mentions that, despite losing both her sight and voice, she was determined to record the tale. But I'm not willing to put a whole lot of stock in verb conjugations across languages, especially when there are so many known mistranslations in the Souls series already. It could just as easily mean that, despite having previously lost her sight and voice, which doesn't necessarily indicate the precise time that it happened, it could function more as a reminder or just a statement of relevant information in regards to why it's a fragmentary jumble of what it ought to be. Which, that messy jumble of a translation might also explain how her followers could have mistranslated it to meaning that they should pillage fire from other Unkindled, in the case that she didn't misunderstand the message of the angels herself. We should also consider the fact that it's not like the angels visited her while she was already in her cage, if her talk of the angels is what earned her imprisonment. She likely had some time to speak of the angels and their message, which Mommy Gwenevere would not have been too fond of. Timeline is always near impossible to nail down in the Souls series, especially in Dark Souls 3 when timelines are so heavily convoluted. I think she was visited by the angels, and once she spoke her message, it was declared heresy by some, and adhered to by others. The Kingdom of Lothric had to stop this at any cost, so they cut out her tongue, blinded her, and stuck her in a cage. At that point, she knew the only way her message would survive would be to scribble down what she could and leave it behind for someone to discover. Regardless, the obscuring ring brings up a very interesting question. Who is Rosaria's firstborn that robbed her of her tongue? We have to assume that this firstborn is someone of note if the description bothers mentioning them at all. Some speculate that it could be Leonard, but there's one big discrepancy with this theory. Namely, if Leonard was going to bother cutting out her tongue to stop her from spreading her message, it's not likely he'd be here serving her as a finger. Unless something traumatic happened to him to make him change his mind. Here's what we know for sure about Leonard. His armor set tells us Leonard was born into royalty, which is believed to be the reason for his skill in both sorcery and swordsmanship. In his youth, Leonard suffered grave burns to his entire body. His face, in particular, which he hid beneath his mask, was terribly scalded. He abstained from restoring these injuries, even after becoming a finger of Rosaria. Indeed, this dingy garb is in fact embroidered with gold thread, portraying its purpose as military wear designed for a noble. So we do know for sure that he was a noble, and he was highly militaristically inclined. We also know that he suffered horrible burns to his body in his youth. Could he have been a member of the Kingdom of Lothric, the kingdom of his mother and grandmother? What if his whole life he'd pledged loyalty to the fire, and then his mother started spewing otherwise? What choice would he have but to cut out her tongue to keep her from spreading these lies? And certainly that would be easier on him than having to kill his own mother. So what then could have happened that would be significant enough to cause him to pull a complete 180 and now serve her and these lies that he thought she was spewing instead? Is it possible that Leonard failed to link the fire and was partially or completely burned by the soul of Cinder, and was reborn as an unkindled, much like we've learned Sister Frida was? It's not exactly uncommon for someone to change their mind whether they succeed or fail at linking the fire. Besides Elfrida, not one of the Risen Lords capable of linking the flame again is willing to give it a second go. At that point, he would have nothing left. Nothing but to set off on a journey of rebirth. The Crescent Moon Sword description tells us, Ringfinger Leonard's weapon of choice, a type of shotel imbued with the power of the moon. Leonard set out on a journey of rebirth, but decided instead to serve the goddess as a knight, and inherited this weapon. He probably heard the rumors, same as many other undead. There was a goddess in the cathedral who could reshape and rebuild anyone, fix any physical deformity, any physical or mental shortcoming. And when he arrived, he discovered the mother he had forsaken so many years ago. Only now he understood the value of her words. He had seen the hopelessness of linking the fire, and instead of being reborn, he kept his scarring as a reminder of his mistake, and as a symbol of loyalty to the goddess. He had no selfish desire to be reborn, only to be a loyal knight. Of course, this is all just speculation, but on the subject of rebirth, we find ourselves diving down another incomprehensibly deep rabbit hole. We know that attempting rebirth too many times causes one to be reborn as a grub, but it's unclear whether this is a set number or if the number varies per individual. The mangrub staff description reads, Staff of the mangrubs, who guard Rosaria's bedchamber. Their holy symbol is formed at the tip. Wielder's luck strengthens effects of sorceries. The mangrubs have clearly been reborn, but as what? So we learn a few things here. Number one, that luck is its strengthening attribute, which encourages one to be hollow to maximize its effectiveness. Number two is that the mangrubs have clearly still been reborn as something, but what? Well, let's examine what a grub is. The term grub is used to describe the larval form of an insect. It's something in its early stages, something that will evolve. Now strap yourselves in because shit's about to get weird. Gertrude was visited by the angels, and she's rebirthing people into grubs. Grubs that, when they use their staff, leave behind a trail of white feathers. I think the grubs are failed attempts at creating angels. I say failed confidently because we don't see a single angel until we reach the Ringed City. What we do see plenty of, however, are the only other things we know of that function as somewhat of a counterpart to the angels. The Pilgrim Butterflies. Our only mention of which comes from the Dragonslayer armor description. The Dragon Slayer armor, controlled by the Pilgrim Butterfly, lost its master long ago, but still remembers their sporting hunts. That's not a lot to go off of, but our best hope of tying them to the angels lies in their name, Pilgrim Butterfly, denoting a connection to the Pilgrims of Londor, hollows who were known to have led unsavory lives and might be very attracted to the idea of something like rebirth. And in looking at their appearances themselves, we see some striking similarities. Look at the Pilgrim Butterflies and compare their appearance not only to the angels, but to the angel pupae dubbed as angel pilgrims that are somehow linked to their presence and call them down in certain parts of the Ring City. As another point of connection between Rosaria's practices and the practices of those in the Ringed City, let's look at the holy symbol of their order. At first, we can see it looks much like an inverted papal cross, but I've noticed it also bears a striking resemblance to another item within the game, the crucifix of the Mad King. Shira, remnant of the old gods, impaled the undying Mad King upon her cross spear, where she would hold him until the end of time. We are not told exactly what caused him to be dubbed as mad, but surely anyone who spoke against the fire or spoke of the evolution of men into angels would be considered as such. There's really no concrete evidence there, though, so we'll leave it at that. But what I think we can see plenty of is evidence linking Rosaria to Londor, to the angels, and to the Ringed City, which is again the only place we see angels in-game. I think we can say reasonably that there is more substantial evidence to support Rosaria being Gertrude, the angel's daughter, than any other named character in the entire series. Any named character. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I would really like to take you off the deep end, and I will present you with another potential theory that I've not personally ever heard put forth. And while I don't necessarily believe this theory myself, my job here is only to provide you with possibilities and allow you to decide what you believe. So let's look only at the concrete evidence that we have, without any bias or speculation. We know Rosaria is related to Gwenevere, based on receiving the bountiful sunlight miracle from her soul. We know she was robbed of her tongue by her firstborn, and we know she supports the killing of those who would link the fire and usurping the fire for your own. That specific mention of the firstborn is huge. A nameless firstborn. A nameless firstborn with a direct relation to Gwenevere. What if Rosaria is actually the first wife of Gwen, mother of the nameless king and mother of Gwenevere? As we know, miracles can be passed down through souls hereditarily, such as the nameless king inheriting Gwen's sunlight. Sunlight Blade in DS1 reads, Miracle wielded by Lord Gwen's firstborn. Boost right weapon with rays of sun. The power of sunlight, manifested as lightning, is very effective against dragons. When the eldest son was stripped of his deific status, he left this on his father's coffin, perhaps as a final farewell. And this seems to be a point that a lot of people miss whenever they're discussing the Nameless King. Gwen was already dead when his firstborn left, meaning it wasn't Gwen himself who rescinded his son's deific status. So who else would have had the authority to do such a thing? Who else would have motivation to do such a thing? Surely only the queen would be capable of destroying his reputation and his claim to the throne and cast him into exile. But how would she do this? Well, one surefire way to accomplish it would be to say that he has allied himself with the ancient dragons in opposition of his father and in opposition of Flame. But why? What would she gain from this besides staying in power? Well, what if her goal, more than the monarchy itself, was to usurp the first flame for herself? And we've seen this before. Queens set themselves up with the current Lord of Light or the bearer of a great soul in an attempt to usurp the flame. Just like Nishandra, just like Elena, just like Alsana had initially intended to do. Could Rosaria actually be a fragment of Manus like the others? Wouldn't it make sense, considering all the connections we have between Rosaria and the Ringed City, home of the Pygmies? Manus is a pygmy lord after all, if not the furtive pygmy, but we're not going to get into that. Could Rosaria have been the first to see the potential for stealing the flame and mantling it within the body? Perhaps the Nameless King discovered this plot and had no intention of letting her do as she pleased with his father's legacy, and that's why she had to dishonor him, enough to have him exiled. But he, in his defiance, was more than willing to do exactly as she claimed, an ally with their ancient enemies after discovering the path of the dragon on his quest for strength. After he cut out her lying tongue, of course. At which point, in fear of her life, she may have went somewhere she knew to be safe. A Way of White sanctuary that was still loyal to her husband. A Way of White sanctuary that was slowly corrupted by the deep. The Cathedral of the Deep, where we find her, eons later, still attempting to pillage the fire by sending undead foolish enough to do her bidding. So what do you think? Is she Gwenevere? Or perhaps one of her previously unnamed daughters? Is she Gertrude specifically? Or is she the wife of Gwen, mother of the first generation of holy children, and a fragment of Manus? You decide. This video has been a huge undertaking for us, and a ton of time and effort have gone into it, so I just want to thank everyone still watching, especially for your support in the past, and moving forward. Both of us here at Sunn Brothers work full-time jobs and have crazy busy lives in between, and although we often move slow on deep, highly informational content like this, it's something that I personally really enjoy doing for you guys, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. Check us out on all our social media. Find us on Facebook and Twitter, both at Sunn Brothers, spelled just like our channel name. We also now have a Patreon up and running for anyone who would like to support us in a more direct way. Also, check us out on Discord, which I am very excited to have operational now as well. Both myself and Ron are regularly playing Souls games and other multiplayer titles, and we intend to periodically host events through our Discord where we will get some of you guys in our games while we're online. And I think that will be an incredibly fun way for us to engage with you all in a very direct and somewhat personal fashion that social media doesn't quite allow. Finally, thank you everyone for watching and for all your continued support. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Be safe, friend. Don't you dare go hollow.